Clarke, previously Jodie Smitten. I was Jodie Smitten for a long time, so some of you might know my work through that name. Recently got divorced, and I got an email the other day saying, "Congratulations on your marriage." I had to reply to that and actually got divorced. Returned to my maiden name. It was really awkward. But that's all a good thing, so it's fine. So yeah, I'm Jodie Clarke, previously Jodie Smitten. I'm autistic and ADHD myself, late diagnosed, and I've got 3 neurodivergent children, all autistic, ADHD, and 2 that are PDA. I've been had a special interest in autism since I was around 17 years old, when I went to work in what I thought was just a neurotypical children's home, and met lots of really incredible children that had co-occurring learning disabilities, and was just absolutely fascinated by how they communicated in a really sort of non-verbal way, and just became really fascinated around all of that sort of stuff. Oddly, I didn't recognise that my own daughter was autistic until she was 7 years old. She masked ferociously. So at that point, autistic masking sort of became my special interest within my special interest. And because she was just my double, everyone was like, well, if she's autistic, clearly you are as well. So I've been on an epic journey, really, in the last sort of, I suppose, 7 years. I'm not naturally an academic. I did okay at school, didn't particularly enjoy it. But I found that once I started to really work within the field, advocating for children and young people and working alongside their families, I'm sat in meetings and I've got to know a family and a young person really, really well. And I'm saying, look, this is what they need and this is why. And I just got basically professionally gaslit with Senkos saying to me, well, what are your qualifications anyway? And talking about all these amazing things that they've done that weren't actually that amazing. And so I did a bit of a 2 fingers up and decided to start a postgrad certificate at Sheffield Hallam University, and I sort of got slightly addicted to Dr. Luke Bearden. I don't know if any of you are aware of his work, but if you aren't, then definitely Google him. Dr. Luke Bearden's incredible, and I've had the privilege of having him supervising me, and so I ended up saying, oh, I'll just do 3 years and do my master's then. And now I'm doing a PhD with him. So, but like I said, I'm not naturally an academic. Exactly what Dan and Alex were talking about with actually sitting down and writing is a real massive barrier for me. So I'm just completely driven on the young people that I support. So I work with families and young people all across the UK and beyond, and most of what I see is young people that have been massively failed by the system, that are in massive mental health crisis, massive levels of autistic burnout. Many of them have masked throughout most of their sort of educational careers, which is why my master's completely focused on autistic masking. And that's led me naturally into autistic burnout. So I've got lots of sort of professional experience of supporting young people with autistic burnout. And I've also had 2 of my own children hit quite severe depths of autistic burnout. So I'm completely driven by passion, really. It's sort of what allows me to try and have some focus when I'm doing like the academic side of my role. So I do a variety of different things, but mainly my sort of passion comes from working directly with autistic young people. I've got the best job in the world. I'm going to Cotswold Wildlife Park in a couple of weeks. A young person is like, I know I live far away, but let's meet and let's go here. So I spend my whole life just like with other neurodivergent people and young people, which is great. And then I have to come and do scary things like this sometimes as well. So why is understanding autistic burnout so important? Well, children as young as 4 years old, just from my experience, are experiencing autistic burnout. And we know that organisations that are there to support our children, our mental health services, our CAM services, really don't have the sort of research-based practice to be able to support autistic children. And most of the young people that I work with who are in autistic burnout, who have been through various different mental health services, have actually been exposed to approaches that have been more harmful, and they've actually come out sort of doubly traumatized from the process. And essentially, our children are not okay, and a bit of a trigger warning here, but our children in general are the most mentally unwell generation of children that we've ever had. But autistic children in particular, the autistic community, we're much more at heightened risk of suicide, poor mental health, poor adult outcomes, unemployment, and all those sorts of awful things. I see some incredibly mentally unwell children that are in depths of autistic burnout. It's horrendous. And I meet the most incredible young people who have got the most incredible brains and incredibly caring, beautiful personalities, and they don't want to be here. They want to be dead. They cannot cope with the world any longer. And they're the ones that keep me sort of driven to get this out there. So defining autistic burnout. So what actually is autistic burnout? I'm not going to read out all of those words because it's sort of like the academic definition. Autistic burnout essentially is a mental health crisis. It's an absolute crash of managing the neurotypical world and the expectations of the neurotypical world. So certainly in working with children and young people, that's usually some sort of burnout from our education system. And I could sit here for hours and talk about why the education system is so difficult for neurodivergent children. But if you go to my website, you'll see there that I talk a lot about that on my website. The education system and the sort of neurotypical world is not set up for autistic brains. And what our autistic children are having to do is constantly compensate for the lack of understanding, the lack of acceptance. So our autistic children are just paddling so fast to keep up with the world and keep up with everything that's expected of them. And I'm talking all the time about children. This applies to autistic adults as well. It's just my focus is obviously on children and young people, but whatever I'm saying also applies to the autistic community as a whole. So the sort of definition that's come from one of the biggest sort of research papers, well, I say one of the research papers that's sort of the foundations, is having all your internal resources exhausted beyond measure and being left with no clean-up crew. So these are young people and children who are completely depleted of any energies, any life. They're completely exhausted to the point where they just crash and they just cannot take on any more of the world. I see autistic burnout really as a form of self-preservation. I feel like the brains of these young people are going, do you know what, I can't take any more of this. I can't take any more of the world. I can't take any more of the sensory demands, any more of the executive functioning demands, any more of the social, neuronormative social demands. And if I continue to put myself in this world and continue in the way that I am, I'm going to cause my brain irreparable damage. Autistic burnout is trauma. So when our bodies and our brains completely crash and no longer allow us to function in the outside neurotypical world, it's self-preservation. It's saying we're just not doing this anymore. You're hurting yourself. You're harming yourself. And essentially, we end up with young people who are just unable to manage, unable to attend school, which I think might be on the next slide. Kieran Rose talks a lot about this on his website, and I always sort of credit his work alongside mine because we tend to follow really similar paths. I'm just going to skip these bits because I know we're short on time. So what does autistic burnout look like in children and young people? Most of the young people that will present to mental health services will be deemed to have depression and high levels of social anxiety. There's massive overlap in links between autistic burnout and depression. The differences with depression is that usually it will just be treated with a round of CBT or a box of antidepressants. And the problem is with that is that autistic burnout isn't caused by something internally. Autistic burnout is caused by the environment around us and too many expectations and too many pressures. So you can't just give a young person an antidepressant and expect them to step back into school, which is the environment that was harming them in the first place. It's setting them up to fail. You can't just speak to a young person and ask them to use some grounding techniques or some CBT type techniques and expect them to walk back into a noisy dinner hall with 200 other students with various different smells and lights and noises and expected to eat quickly and get out to play. It's just causing more and more harm, more and more damage. So these are some of the sort of symptoms, I suppose, of autistic burnout that we see when we're supporting young people. So mutism, no longer able to communicate verbally if they were before, unable to sleep or sleeping too much due to anxiety or exhaustion, struggling with self-care, To the point where some young people I work with are unable to shower, wash, brush their teeth, brush their hair, wear clothing. I've worked with lots of young people that when I meet them, they will be simply just wrapped in blankets because their bodies just cannot take any more sensory input. Self-harm, suicidal ideation, restrictive food intake, which is a topic in itself. I did a talk on this yesterday about restrictive food intake in autistic burnout. When you consider that the body has said, and the brain has said, no more, I can't take any more, I'm overloaded, I'm depleted, I'm just completely exhausted, I can't take anything else, any more input on my body right now. When you consider food and how high demand that is on so many levels, first of all, it hits nearly every single sensory system in our bodies, from smell, touch, taste, our interoception. It hits everything. And then you've also got the executive functioning demands of actually preparing food, deciding what you want to eat and all of that, which for me I struggle with on any given day, let alone if you're in depths of autistic burnout. Sometimes the young people are no longer able to mask, they're no longer able to attend school. You see an intensity and frequency of meltdowns and shutdowns. Sensory needs are much more heightened, so sensory seeking needs might be much more pronounced. Sensory sensitivities might be much more pronounced. Unable to make decisions, so executive functioning is massively impacted. It's just a state of just complete unable to function, essentially. Like the young people that I see they're just unable to manage anything that they were before. I suppose it's important to note here is that actually when you look back to all of the research that was into autistic regression, it can very much mimic some of this. And back in the day, you had to have signs of autistic regression in order to be recognised as being autistic. But actually, when you look at some of that, the chances are it was triggered at a time when actually the world just became too much, the expectations became too much. They maybe started at school, started at preschool, came out of the bubble that was home. Kieran Rose talks much more about the links between autistic burnout and regression. And it very much feels, when I work with these young people, it very much feels like a regression. It feels like everything has to be done for them. They have to be supported in the same way that you would support a much, much younger child. How does it feel inwardly? So the young people that I work with who are able to, I build that trust up with and able to share this with me, which is a really privileged thing to be able to do, talk about being incredibly lonely, incredibly isolated. They see their friends, their peers still managing the world, still managing to get up and walk out the door and attend school that day. They feel incredibly scared. A lot of young people don't know whether this is going to be their permanent state now, whether they're going to be able to take steps to move away from these awful feelings and the physical place that they're in. They feel very broken, that they're not good enough. They very much internalize that this is them, this is their problem, this is their fault, this is because they are not good enough. They very much feel like a burden. Most families that I work with, there's had to be some level of sacrifice, sometimes quite big sacrifices from parents in order to be at home and care for a child in burnout. Many parents have had to give up jobs, give up work, so there might be financial strain. They might feel like a burden because parents are having to do more for them, prepare food, support them to get dressed, support them to shower, and all of those things. There's a massive loss of trust in others. Usually this is linked to school trauma. Most of the young people that I work with in this level of burnout have got really significant school trauma, and they've met adult upon adult upon adult that said, yeah, I'm here to listen to you, I'm here to help you, I'm here to support you, and obviously then that's not sort of been followed through. There's lots of catastrophizing and spiraling, and there's a constant feeling of overwhelm and constant anxiety that's just there permanently. So, causes of burnout. I am aware that I'm going really, really quickly through this. There is lots more on my website if you needed to catch up. Causes of burnout. So neurotypical expectations. So again, going back to the education system, but, you know, as the world in general, the demands on us from an executive functioning perspective, most of us who are neurodivergent will have differences or difficulties around executive functioning. Sometimes that's just due to the general anxiety that we feel from, you know, the onslaught of information around us. Sometimes that's just because we've got ADHD brains and we might be dopamine deficient. Yet still, because so many of those internal processes are hidden from the outside world, we're still expected to keep up. And I spend a lot of time in schools where I go in and I observe young people, and our education system is constantly up in its game in terms of the expectations and the pressures and the speed at which stuff is being thrown out at kids. And I remember sitting there in one lesson, and this was a primary school, so they were still relatively young. And I was actually there to observe another child, but I'd sort of, you know, I've got that sort of like, I'm always spotting different neurodivergent kids. And there was a lad in the front, and I could see that every time there was a transition, which was about every 10, 15 minutes to the next topic, he was like struggling. He was like trying to, which book is it I need now? And you could see he was working so hard. I could like feel the energy from him. He's like this beneath the surface, just trying to keep up, not want to get like singled out by the teacher for being behind, and really working so hard to keep up with what he needed to be doing next. And he was needed, it was like, right, get your reading books out now. So he's struggling. It was during when we'd just gone back after COVID, so all of them had everything underneath their desks, which was just chaos because there was just stuff everywhere. So he's struggling to look for his reading book, and he finally got it out and was looking for the right page. And he must have just been literally seconds behind most of the others in the class. And the teacher walked past and was like, "Oh, come on, are you in daydream land today?" And I could just feel his heart absolutely sink. You could just feel that really non-malicious comment that the teacher felt that she was just being playful was just absolutely crushed him. He just couldn't keep up with the constant demands to be able to manage the school day. Socialising, communication, interaction. Again, like those of you that aren't aware of double empathy theory in terms of autistic communication, I definitely advise you to have a Google of that. Autistic people communicate and socialise differently. We interact differently, and that's what the double empathy problem is all about. There's this idea that autistic people, or very sort of outdated idea that autistic people have social and communication deficits. We just do things differently. We just communicate differently. And when we're in neurotypical environments, we have to adapt our communication in order to sometimes avoid ridicule or negative consequences. And again, I see this all the time in the school system where neurodivergent kids will communicate in a way that's just really, really natural to them. So a really lovely example was, again, I was in a primary school classroom, and a young lad that I wasn't there to observe decided that when the teacher was telling everybody off for messing around he was telling everyone off for messing around in the toilets. And he said to the class, "You know, you've just come back from lunchtime. That's when you should have used the toilet. I was actually being really generous letting you all go to the toilet at this point in the day." And the lad in the front turned around and said, "Actually, sir, if you think about, we were first sitting at lunch today, and it takes this amount of minutes for our digestive systems to work. About now is the perfect time when our systems actually are going to need the toilet." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is fascinating." Like, yeah, like 45 minutes. And I was really interested in what he was saying. The teacher did not take kindly to it at all. He like really told him off. And this lad was just sat there, and you could see him thinking, "Why am I being told off? Like, I'm sharing information. I'm doing you a favour. I'm helping you be a better teacher." But that clearly wasn't how it was. And I see little what Kieran Rose actually talks about is microaggressions. I see them all the time in the work that I do, and when I go into schools, these tiny little microaggressions that slowly actually teach autistic kids that to be authentically yourself is not okay, and it's not safe, which is where autistic masking comes in. So there's all these different ways that we're having to work so much harder in order to be able to avoid bullying, avoid ridicule, and just remain safe in our environments. Invalidation is a massive one, particularly around sensory needs, which actually falls nicely into the next one. I work with a lot of young people that aren't able to manage the sensory environment of the school, whether that be sitting on the hard, uncomfortable floors, cross-legged in assemblies, or the smelly, noisy dinner halls, or even just the classroom with the whiteboard buzzing and the lights coming through and the constant sort of competing chatter and noises in the background. And yet still there's this myth that autistic people can be desensitized from their sensory needs through, not through choice of their own. So there's the amount of meetings I've gone to is like, well, they need to learn to manage the dinner hall. And I'm like, well, why? Well, they need to learn to manage in the real world. I'm like, what real world are they going to be forced to sit in a hall with like 300 kids that are all eating different meals, and there's the smell of the dinner hall? And like, any working office now, if they decide to go into an office, allows them to have their lunch wherever they want. So, and kids from a really early age get told, it's not too loud, it's not that loud, you'll be fine, you'll be fine, you'll be fine. You're not in there for very long, or it's not that bad. So that just, again, those microaggressions every single day, all the time, particularly as so many of these kids aren't even recognised as being autistic for a really long time. So all of this is just compounding all of the time. They're like these sort of the way of walking through life where they're just having to constantly be on guard and hypervigilant to the environment around them and the onslaught of the environment around them. So this is sort of what I quite often see. I'm trying to support a young person who's in high levels of burnout and unable to manage the world, unable to cope. Brain, body has said, no more. This is self-preservation mode. We're shutting you down. You stay away, you stay in your room, you stay at home. And professionals come in and go, let's just give them some CBT and send them back to school, or they need to build resilience. They need to manage in this real world that doesn't exist. They'll try to use desensitization techniques, like, well, we just have them in for an hour a day until they get a bit more used to it. And I'm like, it's not going to work. Pushing through the anxiety and grounding techniques and breathing techniques. And I'm not saying that none of this is effective if the environment that we're supporting them to enter has made loads of reasonable adjustments and it is conducive to their neurology, and that it's not going to cause sensory trauma. But usually these approaches are to get them straight back into the same environment that caused them the harm and the trauma in the first place. Parents hear this all the time, the longer that you keep them home, the harder it be for them to return. And I'm sat on the other side of the parents going, we don't want them to return because that place caused them harm. Like, we don't want them to return, so what's the issue? Depression treatments and medications, I'm not a medical clinician, I'm not going to even pretend to be. And these do have places with some young people that I work with at particular times, but you can't just medicate a child back into a system or back into an environment that's caused them harm. And too much input. When a child hits burnout in that level of mental health crisis, everyone goes, oh, and suddenly you've got educational welfare officers, and you've got CAMs, and you've got engagement workers, and you've got outreach workers, and you've got play therapists, and you've got educational psychologists, and they're all like poking and prodding this child, or why can't you go to school, why can't you leave your room, blah, 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 blah. And you've got a young person whose brain and body has gone, no, I can't take anything else. This is too much. Everything's too much. Just leave me alone. And then suddenly it's like, okay, this is actually worse than when I was just getting up and going to school. So sometimes less is more. And this is a really, really difficult place to be for professionals because they like to tick boxes and reach goals and see progress. But it's also a really, really frightening place to be as a parent. I've been a parent in this situation and I've supported parents in this situation, and parents are like, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? And I'm like, you know what? Sometimes you just have to be. And that's it. well, should we be doing this? Should we be doing that? And I'm like, no. It's a scary place for me as a practitioner sometimes, because I'm like, yeah, send CAMs away, send them away, send them away. But anecdotally, what we're seeing, and this isn't just my professional work, but colleagues that do the same sort of work in terms of burnout recovery and therapy, is what we're seeing is that when everyone backs off and everyone just trusts that the child will when they can, we do start to see light at the end of the tunnel. It can be a really, really frightening place for parents and the young person themselves. It can be, you have to have an awful lot of patience, and you absolutely have to trust that the young person in front of you desperately wants to feel okay, desperately wants to be learning, succeeding, enjoying life, but right at the moment they're just not able to. So what do we do with these young people? We basically say, right, okay, you're leading the way. Over to you. I'm going to support you with whatever you are able to manage, and we give full autonomy. It's frightening when you've got a child that can't leave their bedroom and wants to spend all day playing Minecraft or scrolling pointlessly through YouTube. It's frightening because you think, well, is my child ever going to leave their bedroom? Are they, are we dealing with screen addiction? And even as a practitioner, when I'm supporting parents and I'm saying, yeah, trust in the process, trust in the process, trust in the process. And they're like, well, how long will it be before he manages to leave his room? And I'm like, how long's a piece of string? What we generally are seeing is around the 2-year mark, which I know sounds a really, really long time. But if we can give complete low demands and we can tell everyone to just bugger off and leave them alone, and we can give them autonomy, and we can allow them to just gently tiptoe back into the world in a way that feels safe to them, and we can build trust back up with them, then around 2 years, and we do see sort of different bits and pieces within that 2 years. But the important thing is that we have to remove the demands and give autonomy. I've worked with young people that we can be like 4 years down the line and we're still feeling like we are wrapped in blankets, not being able to leave bedrooms. But when we actually look at the whole picture, we realise that for the first 2 years, we still had so-and-so trying to do an assessment. We still had this person that was coming once a week, even though it really wasn't working and really, really didn't want them to. But parents couldn't say no to it, because if parents say no to it, it then looks like parents are blocking support, which, parent blame and all of that is like a whole other subject. But unless we can give these young people exactly what they need in that space to process and recover and stop putting additional demands on them that just continue to deplete them, we can see some really, really beautiful emergence from that. The biggest thing for me is that we have to start again. Somebody actually, I talked about this briefly yesterday with some clinicians, and one of them was like, it's like a bit like a rebirth, isn't it? And I was like, well, I like the term rewilding, but yeah, sort of like a rebirth, where we know that the life that has been led by this young person previous to burnout has not worked. It's been damaging, it's been harmful. So what we need to do is build a new world. What we need to do is work out what is safe and what isn't safe. What do they need in order to actually thrive? And sometimes that world looks very, very different to the mainstream system and the neurotypical societies that we expect them to go into. And one of the things that I talk about with parents on this process is like, remove all the shoulds. Well, they should be doing this, or they should be doing that, should be doing a walk every day for their mental health. And I'm like, remove all the shoulds, because all of those shoulds have been like, generated through with a neurotypical lens. So it's, everybody has their very own individual journey to rewilding and to getting back to a place where they feel safe, and how they dip their, talking about this with a family recently. We've got an older, basically a young adult really now, and I talked about having a mentor or a PA or somebody that can find where in the world feels safe on a really basic level. Like if I go, say, for example, if I go out for something to eat, I like going out for breakfast mostly. If I go out for breakfast and I say, can I have the beans separate from the toast? And they go, let me just check that with the kitchen. And then I'm like, this isn't going to be the place for us. Because when I try to get my needs met, I feel like a burden. If I go in and go, can we just keep the beans separate from the toast? And they're like, yeah, we'll just put them in a little pot on the side. I'm like, yeah, perfect. This is a safe place for me. And you cannot underestimate what a difference that makes to a neurodivergent person in terms of feeling safe, emotionally safe and physically safe within their environment. So this is the sort of journey, we go on. And it is different for every person. My aim with all of my work around burnout is that autistic burnout is actually a recognised mental health crisis within CAMS or within professions within schools, and that we can support all autistic people, but autistic young people and children, because that's my focus, to actually rewild and be accepted in the world as their authentic selves, where they're not putting themselves in harmful situations and they're not forced to put on to mask and all of those things that we know are linked to really, really poor mental health outcomes. Let's see. So this is some of the things that I do with young people. So we look at, okay, what feels safe in terms of clothing? What feels like sensory safe? What feels safe to you? Like when I first started going out and about talking about what I do and training and things like that, I didn't dress like this. I didn't look like this. And I just got to the point where I was like, do you know what? Anything else on my feet other than Crocs feels just so crap and so uncomfortable. Like, who cares? Like, I think you just have this persona that if somebody's like not dressed in a suit, I've got an issue with people in suits, not dressed in a suit, nobody's going to believe what they say. And I certainly experienced that, like, in my sort of earlier in my career, where I felt like I had to dress the part. And now I'm pretty rewilded now, a bit feral. And I just try to stay comfortable at all time. I mean, I haven't got pajama bottoms on. That's me masking. What does safe education look like? Mainstream education is not safe for a lot of autistic young people. It's not a safe environment. Who are the safe people? Who are the safe people that you can say, oh, God, that buzzing is really annoying me. That buzzing's really annoying me. And rather than go, oh, it's okay, you can just ignore it, they go, should we get some ear defenders? Do you need to leave the room? Safe places, safe foods, and safe activities. I don't know why safe activities is so big behind... So it's just clearly my ADHD going, I'm bored of doing these slides now, move on. And this is the world that we want, that we have to start developing with these young people. We go on a journey, we go through 3 stages. We go on a journey of self-understanding, self-acceptance and self-advocacy. If I can get a young person to a place where they can walk into an environment and say if they're feeling uncomfortable or experiencing sensory distress or any of that, that's a really, really nice place, providing that whatever place they've gone into has got safe people within it. And we always that's where we build resilience. We build resilience to people who are very rigid and unempathetic, ironically, that we say, okay, this isn't the place for me, and we walk out again. That's, for me, autistic resilience. And we know that it's a them problem, not an us problem. It is a bit of a roller coaster in terms of recovery. It can be a bit sort of 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. We deal with a lot of young people that have got an awful lot of internalised ableism. So as soon as they start to feel a bit recharged again, they go, well, I'm going back to school because I need to go back to school, and I need to go back to school if I want to get a good job, and blah, 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 and all of this sort of neurotypical expectation. We have a lot of young people who start to recover in terms of their interoception, so their internal senses that tell them how they're feeling and to meet their basic needs. And when that starts to become, I can't think of the words, but basically interoception can get really, really suppressed when you're really traumatized. So you won't necessarily feel, and you'd be quite shut down and quite numb. When that starts to recover, some young people I work with can become very overwhelmed by this flood of feeling and emotion and just the world around them. That can be quite a frightening place. to suddenly feel all this emotion and not be able to necessarily make sense of it. What else have I got on here? I can't even remember now. I've lost my train of thought. Finding new interests. This is a really beautiful one for me. Like, I work with kids that might not have been able to leave the house for 2 years, but they've learned Japanese. And they're planning a trip to Japan. I think it's like the whole manga type stuff. It's a popular interest for autistic people in general. But when we allow these kids to actually get in tune with the monotropic nature of their autistic brains, and we allow them to lead their learning and lead their interests, so many of the kids I work with just are self-taught. In burnout recovery, they're self-taught in so many different things. Like Duolingo is like the most popular app, I think, amongst the young people that I work with. But they've become so much more creative again, and so much of that interest-led, curiosity-led learning and that monotropic style of learning is completely suppressed by the mainstream school system. So it's beautiful when you just see these children re-emerge. And I always say, I said to, I can't remember who I said it to a group of parents the other day when I was like, yeah, my special interest has been autism, like since I was like 17, blah, 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 blah. I was like, so if your child has got like an obsession with something, don't suppress it, like encourage it. Like those of us who have managed to make it out sort of alive and generally mentally well from the education system have then been allowed to like hyper focus on an interest. Some of us are lucky enough to actually make careers out of it. Like I get paid for info dumping. It's just like the best thing ever. So I always like try to support parents to say like this isn't an obsession that you need to like limit. It's just go with it, go with those new interests. And I have some great conversations with young people. Like I love being info dumped by another autistic person because I don't know if maybe I feel their joy or something. This is just general practical support for any parents or professionals that are supporting parents. Like, it's really, really difficult, and there's no magic wand answers for being able to give your burnt out child the recovery that they need. You're constantly fighting against attendance policies and EWOs that are threatening to take you to court because your child's not in school, or services that are saying that you're blocking and all this, that and the other. And I don't have any magic wand answers how to tackle that. I'm still trying to tackle that myself as a parent and constantly in tribunal for one of my children. But there are some organisations such as IPSIA and Not Fine in School who are on Facebook, and Square Peg, who all look at those difficulties. Energy accounting tools. So on my website is an energy accounting tool that I developed with young people called the smartphone analogy, which is just a really nice analogy about the various different apps that you have open throughout the day, different parts of your day are a different app, and which ones drain you and which ones recharge you. Your own adult journey. Like if you're a parent of a neurodivergent child, the chances are you're also neurodivergent, and a lot of parents I work with sort of go on this journey alongside their children. And one parent said to me, I was like, why have you said yes to this then when you know it's going to, it's not good for her and it's going to cause meltdowns, it's going to cause you a lot of stress? She's like, well, it's that people pleasing in me, isn't it? And I'm like, so it's your trauma. I was like, yeah, we're trying to support your child to self-advocate. Do you think you need to do a bit of work on that yourself? And she was like, well, I was putting it to one side on the back burner until I'd sorted my child out. I was like, you can't. Because your responses to the world impact them. So if you can find a really, a neurodivergent counsellor or neurodivergent mentor that you can build that relationship with, then I think the adult journey that you go on is really, really important too. Well, that's just what I've talked about already. I'm really conscious of time. I've written, I got approached by Jessica Kingsley Autism Division about actually writing a book about autistic burnout. So this is out in January, which feels like ages away, and I wrote ages ago, and I was like, why does it take so long to produce a book? So it's all of JKP, it's out of my hands now, but it's titled Stop the World I Want to Get Off, a guide to understanding and recovery of autistic burnout, or something along those lines. I can't remember the title. And that'll be out in January, but there's also lots of stuff on my website around autistic burnout and recovery from autistic burnout, and masking as well. So Sorry, that was like a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but there is more information out there.